Alright, we are reading Living with Art by Mark Getlein, the 11th edition. I'm doing this so that my 4-week-long art appreciation class can listen along on their way to work or whatever they need to do. Again, I apologize in advance for not being able to pronounce some of the words. Please let me know in the description, in the comments down below how to pronounce them correctly if you want to. And don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. Anyway, here we go. Chapter 13. Architecture. Architecture satisfies a basic universal human need for a roof over one's head. More than walls, more than a chair to sit on or a soft bed to lie on, a roof is the classic symbol of protection and security. We've all heard the expression, "I have a roof over my head," but it would be unusual to hear someone say, "I'm all right because I have walls around me." Of course, in purely practical terms, a roof does not keep out the worst of the elements. Snow and rain and warm climates, a roof may be sufficient to keep people dry and comfortable. The roof seems to be symbolic of the nature of architecture. More than any of the other arts, architecture demands structural stability. Every one of us daily moves in and out of buildings, houses, schools, stores, banks, and movie theaters, and we take for granted, usually without thinking about it, that they will not collapse on top of us. That they do not is a tribute to their engineering. If a building is physically stable, it adheres faithfully to the principles of the particular structural system on which its architecture is based. Structural systems in architecture. Since the time of the earliest human settlements, architects have tackled the challenge of erecting a roof over empty space, setting walls upright, and having the whole stand secure. Their solutions have depended upon the materials they have available, for as we shall see, certain materials are better suited than others to a particular structural system. There are two basic families of structural systems, the shell system and the skeleton and skin system. In the shell system, one building material provides both structural support and sheathing, outside covering. Buildings made of brick or stone or adobe fall into this category, and so do older, pre-19th century wood buildings constructed of heavy timbers, the most obvious example being the log cabin. The structural materials comprises the walls, marks the boundary between inside and outside, and is generally visible as the exterior surface. It may also serve for the ceiling of the building, and even, though more rarely, the roof. The skeleton and skin system might be compared to the human body, which has a rigid, bony skeleton to support its basic frame and more fragile skin for sheathing. We find it on the teepee of the American Plains Indian, which consists of a conical skeleton of wooden poles covered with a skin made of animal hides. We find it again in modern skyscrapers, with their steel frames, skeletons, supporting the structure and a sheathing skin of glass or some other light material. The task of any structural system is to channel the forces that act upon the building safely to the ground. Architects speak of these forces as loads. The first and most important of these loads is the building's own weight, which is caused by gravity. Gravity is constantly pulling the building toward earth as though daring it to fail. The building's weight is a permanent and unchanging load. But there are other loads that come and go, such as people moving through the building, furnishings placed in the building, snow that accumulates on the roof, wind that blows against the sides, earth that settles beneath its foundations, and even earth that trembles beneath it as in an earthquake. No matter what materials it's made of or how complicated its structure, a building handles these loads in just two ways, pushing and pulling. When an element is pushed, we say it is in compression. When an element is pulled, we say it is in tension. An element in compression becomes shorter. An element in tension lengthens. These changes are rarely visible to the naked eye, but they nevertheless occur. You can get a sense of the forces of tension and compression by imagining yourself as a structural material. Two friends raise you up high overhead. Their arms locked. One holds you by your ankles, the other one braces your shoulders. You are horizontal, facing the floor, as rigid as you can be. The three of you have now formed an opening, a doorway. Say that people could pass through. The two people holding you up are in compression. Your weight is pushing down on them, and eventually their knees may buckle or their elbows give way if they are not strong enough. And you? Your situation is a little more complicated. Your front side is under tension, but your back side is under compression. You will feel this when you start to sag. Your stomach muscles will make it clear that they are stretching, and your back will tell you that it is being scrunched. To withstand the stresses induced by loads, then structural materials must possess tensile strength, be able to withstand tension, and or compressive strength, be able to withstand compression. Wood, stone, concrete, and steel are most commonly used materials. All possess both tensile strength and compressive strength, though not always in equal measure. Stone and concrete have excellent compressive strength, but little tensile strength. Wood is virtually equal in compressive and tensile strength, though it is not nearly as strong as steel, our strongest construction material. With these basic concepts in mind, we can turn to some of the structural systems that architects have developed and look at some famous buildings that use them. We take up the systems roughly in the chronological order in which they were invented. Load-bearing construction. Another term for load-bearing construction is stacking and piling. This is the simplest method of making a building, and it is suitable for brick, stone, adobe, ice blocks, and certain modern materials. Essentially, the builder constructs the walls by piling layer upon layer, starting thick at the bottom, getting thinner as the structure rises, and usually tapering inward toward the highest point. The whole may then be topped by a lightweight roof, perhaps of thatch or wood. The construction is stable because its greatest weight is concentrated at the bottom, and weight diminishes gradually as the walls grow higher. Load-bearing structures tend to have few and small openings, if any, in the walls, because the method does not readily allow for support of material above a void, such as a window opening. Yet it would be a mistake to think that such basic methods must produce basic results. The Great Friday Mosque at Dejen in Mali is a spectacular example of monumental architecture created from simple techniques and materials. Constructed of adobe, sun-dried brick, and coated with mud plaster, the imposing walls of this mosque have a plastic sculptural quality. The photograph shows well the gentle tapering of the walls imposed by the construction technique, as well as the small size of the windows that illuminate the covered prayer hall inside. The protruding wooden poles serve to anchor the scaffolding that is erected every few years so that workers can restore the mosque's smooth coating of mud plaster. Post and lintel. After stacking and piling, post and lintel construction is the most elementary structural method. Based on two uprights, the post, supporting a horizontal crosspiece, the lintel or beam, see the diagram. This configure can be continued indefinitely so that there may be one very long horizontal supported at critical points along the way by vertical posts to carry its weight to the ground. The posts are in compression. The lintel is compression on its upper side and tension on its lower side. Your situation when you were being lifted by your friends. The most common material for post and lintel construction are stone and wood. Post and lintel construction has been, for at least 4,000 years, a favorite method of architects for raising a roof and providing for open space underneath. On a smaller scale, it is used to open up windows and doorways in load-bearing construction, the lintel bearing the weight of the material above and protecting the void below. The ruins of a portion of the ancient Egyptian temple of Luxor illustrate this majesty, and also the limits of post and lintel construction in stone. Carved as bundles of stems capped by stylized papyrus flower buds, the stone columns support rows of heavy stone lintels, with each lintel spanning 2 columns. The lintels would in turn have supported slabs of stone that served as both ceiling and roof. Because stone does not have great tensile strength, the supporting columns must be closely spaced. A large hall erected in post and lintel construction was thus a virtual forest of columns inside. We call such spaces hypostyle halls, from the Greek for beneath columns. Ancient Egyptians associated hypostyle halls with the primal swamp of creation, where, according to Egyptian belief, the first mound of dry land arose at the dawn of the world. To make that connection clear, they designed their columns as stylized versions of plants that grew in the marshes of the Nile, surrounded by load-bearing walls pierced high up by small windows. The hypostyle halls of Egyptian temples were dark and mysterious places. In ancient Greek, the design of post and lintel buildings, especially temples, became standardized in certain features. Greek architects developed and codified three major architectural styles, roughly in sequence. We know them as the Greek orders. The most distinctive feature of each was the design of the column. By the 17th century BCE, the Doric style had been introduced. A Doric column has no base, nothing separating it from the floor below. Its capital, the topmost part between the shaft of the column and the roof or lintel, is a plain stone slab above rounded stone. The Ionic style was developed in the 16th century BCE and gradually replaced the Doric. An Ionic column has a stepped base and carved capital in the form of two graceful spirals known as volutes. The Corinthian style, which appeared in the 4th century BCE, is yet more elaborate, having a more detailed base and a capital carved as a stylized bouquet of acanthus leaves. The most famous and influential work of Greek architecture is certainly the Parthenon, a Doric temple that we will examine in chapter 14. Here we look at the smaller temple of Athena Nike, which stands nearby on the hilltop site in Athens known as the Acropolis. With their stepped bases and volute capitals, the columns indicate that this is an iconic temple. The columns support a structure whose remains, reconstructed here in a line drawing, display other important elements of Greek architecture. The plain, horizontal stone lintels of Egypt are here elaborated into a compound structure called an entablature. The entablature consists of three basic elements. The simple, unadorned band of lintels immediately over the columns is the architrave. The area above the architrave is the frieze, here ornamented with sculpture and relief. The frieze is capped by a shelf-like projection called a cornice. The entablature, in turn, supports a triangular element called a pediment, which is itself crowned by its own cornice. Like the frieze, the pediment would have been ornamented with sculpture and relief. If these elements look familiar to you, it's because they have passed into the vocabulary of Western architecture and form part of the basis of the style we refer to broadly as classical. For centuries, banks, museums, universities, government buildings, and churches have been built using the elements first codified and named by the Greeks, then adapted and modified by the Romans. Many of the great architectural traditions of the world are based in post and lintel construction. The architectural style developed in China provides a good contrast to that of Greece, for while its principles were developed around the same time, the standard material is not stone, but wood. We know from terracotta models found in tombs that the basic elements of Chinese architecture were in place by the 2nd century BCE. During the 6th century CE, this architectural vocabulary was adopted by Japan along with other elements of Chinese culture. We illustrate it here with a Japanese building, the incomparable Byodo Inn. Built as a palace, the Byodo Inn was converted to a Buddhist shrine after the death of the original owner in 1052 CE. Among the works of art it houses is Giotto's sculpture of the Buddha Amida no Yori, discussed in chapter 2. Our first impression is of a weighty and elaborate structure of gracefully curved roofs resting slightly somehow on slender wooden columns. The effect is miraculous, for the building seems to float. But how can all that weight rest on such slender supports? The answer lies in the cluster of interlocking wooden brackets and arms that crowns each column. Called bracket sets, they distribute the weight of the roof and its large overhanging eaves evenly onto the wooden columns, allowing each column to bear up to 5 times the weight it could support directly. Chinese and Japanese architects developed many variations on the bracket set over the centuries, making them larger or smaller, more elaborate or simpler, more prominent or more subtle. The distinctive curving profile of East Asian roofs is made possible by a stepped truss system. Western roofs, in contrast, are usually supported by a rigid triangular truss, in the Greek pediment. By varying the height of each level of the truss, the builders could control the pitch and curve of the roof. Tastes in roof styles varied over time and from region to region. Some roofs are steeply pitched and fall in a fanciful exaggerated curve, almost like a ski jump. Others are gentler with a subtle, barely noticeable curve. The post and lintel system, then, offers potential for both structural soundness and grandeur. When applied to wood or stone, however, it leaves one problem unsolved, and that is the spanning of relatively large open spaces. The first attempt at solving this problem was the invention of the round arch. Round arch and vault. Although the round arch was used by the ancient peoples of Mesopotamia several centuries before our common era, it was most fully developed by the Romans, who perfected the form in the 2nd century BCE. The arch is a compressive structure. Its components push against each other to achieve stability. This makes it particularly suited to stone, which has high compressive strength. An arch is not stable until it is complete, however. During construction, it must be supported from below by a temporary wooden framework called a centering. Once the centering is in place, wedge-shaped blocks of stone are set along its arch-shaped top, beginning from both ends simultaneously. When the topmost block, called the keystone, is wedged into place, the two sides of the arch meet and lean against each other. The centering can be removed, for the arch is now self-supporting. An arch exerts an outward thrust at its base. Unless the arch sits directly on the ground, this thrust must be countered or contained. See the diagram. The arch has many virtues. In addition to being an attractive form, it enables the architect to open up fairly large spaces in a wall without risking the building's structural soundness. These spaces emit light, reduce the weight of the walls, and decrease the amount of material needed. As utilized by the Romans, the arch is a perfect semicircle, although it may seem elongated if it rests on columns. Among the most elegant and enduring of Roman structures based on the arch is the Pont Du Gard at Nimes, France, built about 15 CE, when the empire was nearing its farthest expansion. The Pont Du Gard consists of 3 tiers of arcades, rows of arches set on columns, or, as here, massive piers. It functioned as an aqueduct, a structure meant to transport water, and its lower level served as a footbridge across the river. That it stands today virtually intact after nearly 2,000 years, is crossed by cyclists on the route of the famous Tour de France bicycle race, testifies to the Romans' brilliant engineering skills. Visually, the Pont du Gard exemplifies the best qualities of arch construction. Solid and heavy, obviously durable, it is shot through with open spaces that make it seem light and weight-bearing capabilities effortless. When the arch is extended in depth, when it is in reality many arches placed flush one behind the other, the result is called a barrel vault. This vault construction makes it possible to create large interior spaces. The Romans made great use of the barrel vault. But for its finest expression, we look many hundreds of years later to the churches of the Middle Ages. The Church of St. Foy, in the French city of Conquest, is an example of the style prevalent throughout Western Europe from about 1050 to 1200, a style known as Romanesque. Earlier churches had used the Roman round arch to span the spaces between interior columns that ultimately held up the roof. There were no ceilings, however. Rather, worshippers looked up into a system of wooden trusses and the underside of a pitched roof. Imagine looking directly up into the attic of a house, and you will get the idea. With the Romanesque style, builders set a stone barrel vault as a ceiling over the nave, the long central area, hiding the roof structure from view. The barrel vault unified the interior visually, providing a soaring, majestic climax to the rhythms announced by the arches below. On the side aisle of St. Foy, not visible in the photograph, the builders employed a series of groin vaults. A groin vault results when two barred vaults are crossed at right angles to each other, thus directing the weights and trusses down into the four corners. By dividing up a space into rectangular segments known as bays, each of which contain one groin vault, the architect could cover a long span safely and economically. The repetition of bays also creates a satisfying rhythmic pattern. Pointed arch and vault. Although the round arch and vault of the Romanesque era solved many problems and made many things possible, they nevertheless had certain drawbacks. For one thing, a round arch, to be stable, must be a semicircle. Therefore, the height of the arch is limited by its width. Two other difficulties were weight and darkness. Barrel vaults are both literally and visually heavy, calling for huge masses of stone to maintain their structural stability. They exert an outward thrust all along their base, which builders countered by setting them in massive walls that they dared not weaken with light admitting openings. The Gothic period in Europe, which followed the Romanesque, solved those problems with the pointed arch. The pointed arch, though seemingly not very different from the round one, offers two advantages. Because the sides arc up to a point, weight is channeled down to the ground at a steeper angle, and therefore the arch can be taller. The vault constructed from such an arch can be much taller than a barrel vault. In addition, a pointed arch exerts far less outward thrust at its base than does a round arch. Architects of the Gothic period found they did not need heavy masses of material throughout the curve of the vault as long as the major points of intersection were reinforced. These reinforcements, called ribs, are visible in the nave ceiling of Reims Cathedral. The light captured streaming into the nave of Reims Cathedral in the photograph vividly illustrates another important feature of Gothic church architecture: windows. Whereas Romanesque cathedrals tended to be dark inside, with few and small window openings, Gothic builders strove to open up their walls for large stained glass windows. Most of the stained glass windows in Reims Cathedral have suffered damage and have been replaced with clear glass, which is why the light is so evident in the photograph. Fearing that the numerous window openings could disastrously weaken walls that were already under pressure from the outward thrust of arches, Gothic builders reinforced their walls from the outside with buttresses, piers, and a new invention, flying buttresses. The principles are easy to understand if you imagine yourself using your own weight to prop up a wall. If you stand next to a wall and press the entire length of your body against it, you are a buttress. If you stand away from the wall and press against it with outstretched arms, your body is a pier and your arms are flying buttresses. The illustration here of the exterior of the cathedral shows the Gothic system of buttresses, piers, and flying buttresses, as well as the numerous windows that made them necessary. Dome. A dome is a curved vault built to cover an interior space. The most common type of dome takes the form of a shell of rotation, that is, a form generated by rotating an arch at about a vertical central axis. If the arch is a round Roman arch, a half circle, then the shell of rotation will be a hemisphere, a half globe, which is the form taken by many domes. Sliced vertically, a dome is an arch form. Sliced horizontally, a dome is a complete circle. These two aspects are united in a single continuous surface. Because of this, domes differ from arches in two significant ways. First, a dome can be much thinner in relation to its span than an arch can. Second, a dome exerts far less outward thrust at its base because the circles, called parallels, act as restraining hoops, preventing the dome from opening up. The upper portion of a dome is in compression. In the lower portion, however, the parallels are in tension, which increases as they near the base. Because domes are generally built of stone, brick, or concrete, all of which have low tensile strength, the base of a dome must be reinforced in some way to prevent cracks from developing. The base of the Great Dome of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, for example, is enriched by embedded iron chains. Like so many other architectural structures, the dome was perfected under the incomparable engineering genius of the Romans, and one of the finest dome buildings ever erected dates from the early 2nd century. It is called the Pantheon, which means a temple dedicated to all the gods, or at least all the gods who were venerated in ancient Rome. As seen from the inside, the Pantheon is a perfect hemispherical dome soaring 142 feet above the floor, resting upon a cylinder almost exactly the same in diameter, 140 feet. The dome is made of concrete, which would have been applied over wooden centering erected in the interior, though exactly how this centering was constructed remains a mystery. The ceiling is coffered, ornamented with recessed rectangles. Coffers, which lessen its weight, only about 2 feet thick at its highest point. The dome increases dramatically in thickness toward its base as a series of step rings appear on the outer surface. The rings add weight to the base of the dome and increase its stability. At the very top of the dome is an opening 29 feet in diameter called an oculus, or eye. Thought to be symbolic of the eye of heaven, this opening provides the sole and plentiful illumination for the building. In its conception, then, the Pantheon is amazingly simple, equal in height and width, symmetrical in its structure, round form set upon round form. Yet because of its scale and its satisfying proportion, the effect is overwhelming. The combined structural possibilities of the dome and the vault enabled the Romans to open up huge spaces such as the Pantheon without interior supports. Another important factor that allowed them to build on such a scale was their use of concrete. Whereas Greek and Egyptian buildings had been made of solid stone, monumental Roman buildings were made of thick concrete, tamped down into parallel brick walls as though into a mold, then faced with stone veneer to look as though they were made of solid stone. An important technological breakthrough, the use of concrete cut costs and enabled buildings on a grand scale. The visitors entered the Pantheon through the rectangular portico, or porch, that is joined somewhat incongruously to it. Here we recognize the characteristic form of the Greek temple as inherited by the Romans: post and lintel construction, Corinthian order, entablature, and pediment. In Roman times, an approach to the building was constructed to lead to the portico, while obscuring the rest of the temple. Thinking that they were entering a standard post and lintel temple, visitors must have been stunned to see the enormous space the enormous round space open up before their eyes. Tourists today experience the same theatrical surprise. The Pantheon is a rotunda, a round building, and its dome sits naturally on the circular drum of the base. Often, however, architects wish to set a dome over a square building. In that case, a transitional element is required between the circle at the dome's base and the square of the building's top. An elegant solution can be found in the Hagia Sophia, the Church of the Holy Wisdom in Istanbul. Designed by two mathematicians, Anthemius and Tralles, and Anthemius of Tralles and Isidorus of Miletus. Hagia Sophia was built as a church during the 6th century when Istanbul, then called Constantinople, was the capital of the Byzantine Empire. When the Turks conquered the city in the 15th century, Hagia Sophia was converted for use as a mosque. It was at that time that the 4 slender towers, minarets, were added. The building is now preserved as a museum in sheer size and perfection of form. It was the architectural triumph of its time and has seldom been matched since then. The dome of Hagia Sophia rises 183 feet above the floor, with its weight carried to the ground by heavy stone piers, in this case squared columns at the 4 corners of the immense nave. Around the base of the dome is a row of closely spaced arch windows, which make the heavy dome seem to float upward. The exterior view makes it clear that these windows are situated between buttresses that ring the base of the dome, containing its outward thrust and compensating for any structural weakening caused by the window openings. Each of the 4 sides of the building consists of a monumental round arch, and between the arches and dome are curved triangular sections known as pendentives. It is the function of the pendentives to make a smooth transition between rectangle and dome. The domes of the Pantheon and the Hagia Sophia serve primarily to open up vast interior spaces. Seen from the outside, the hemispherical form is obscured by the buttressing needed to contain their powerful outward thrust. Yet the dome is such an inherently pleasing form that architects often used it for purely decorative purposes as interior ornament to crown a building. In that case, it is often set high on a drum, a circular base, so that it can be seen from the ground. A famous example of a building crowned by ornamental dome is the Taj Mahal in Agra, India. The Taj Mahal was built in the mid-17th century by the Muslim Emperor of India, Shah Jahan, as a tomb for his beloved wife, Arjamand Benu. Although the Taj is nearly as large as Hagia Sophia and possessed of a dome rising some 30 feet higher, it seems comparatively fragile and weightless. Nearly all its exterior lines reach upward from the graceful pointed arches to the pointed dome to the 4 slender minarets poised at the outside corners. The Taj Mahal, constructed entirely of pure white marble, appears almost as a shimmering mirage that has come to rest for a moment beside the peaceful reflecting pool. The section drawing clarifies how the dome is constructed. Over the underground burial chambers of Shah Jahan and his wife, the large central room of the tomb rises to a dome ceiling. Over this, on the roof of the building, sits a tall drum crowned by a pointed dome. A small entryway gives access to the interior for maintenance purposes, but it is not meant to be visited. The exterior is shaped in a graceful bulging S-curve silhouette that obscures the actual drum and dome structure evident in the cutaway view. Corbelling. Islamic architects knew the rise of the arch and the dome because Islam came of age in a part of the world that had belonged first to the Romans and then to the Byzantine Empire. When Islamic rulers settled in India, their architects brought these construction techniques with them, resulting in such buildings as the Taj Mahal. Indigenous Indian architecture, in contrast, does not make use of the arch or the dome, but is based on post and lintel construction. To create arch, vault, and dome forms, Indian architects used a technique called corbelling. A corbelled arch, each course of stones, or each row of stones, extends slightly beyond the one below until eventually the opening is bridged. Just as round Roman arch can be extended in depth to create a vault or rotated to create a dome, so corbelling can create vault forms, and as in the temple interior illustrated here, dome forms. Ornamented by band upon band of ornate carving and set with figures of 16 celestial nymphs, the corbelled dome rests on an octagon of lintels supported by 8 columns. Pairs of stone brackets between each column provide additional support. The elaborate filigree carving that decorates every available surface testifies to the virtuosity of Indian stone workers, in whose skillful hands stone was made to seem as light as lace. Although to the naked eye a corbelled arch may be indistinguishable from the round arch described previously, it does not function structurally as a round arch does, channeling weight outward and downward, and so does not enable the construction of large, unobstructed interior spaces. We're going to end right there for part 1 of chapter 13, and we will pick up with cast iron construction in part 2 of chapter 13.